Welcome back to WHDT World News. We're talking with Shahid Buttar, who is the Executive Director of the Bill of Rights Defense Committee. Shahid, yesterday was the Bill of Rights Day. What did your group go out and do?
We worked with grassroots coalitions in dozens of cities around the country to mount creative, visible displays of dissent. For instance, in Fort Meade, Maryland, outside the NSA headquarters, we dropped a banner reading "Save America, Close the NSA" off a highway overpass. Similar actions like that happened in Oakland, in Charlotte, North Carolina, in Cleveland, Ohio. All over the country, concerned people raised their voice, and we hope very much that that can serve as a clarion call to concerned Americans in other places to raise their voices as well.
How aware do you think that Americans are to the ways that the government is usurping the Bill of Rights?
Yeah, unfortunately not very at all. I think that most people are unfortunately, profoundly ignorant of the various ways in which our government is abusing our rights. And quite frankly, even those of us who specialize in paying attention to this stuff, I'm very closely...
But why do you suppose that is? Why do you think that the American people are ignorant to this?
I think one big reason is government spin. Every time there's a news story on these issues, well, think about it in these terms. The NSA has been spying on America pervasively without individual suspicion for over 10 years. The first time anybody heard anything about it was in 2005, at least 3 years after the programs began in secret. And then it was at the front page of the New York Times, and then it disappeared. Nobody ever heard about it again. 3 years later, it became very controversial in the middle of the presidential election season in 2008. It was controversial for about a week, and then nobody heard about it for another 5 years until Edward Snowden reveals the documents to the press that establish with no uncertainty what exactly is happening. And we advocates have been screaming bloody murder for years, but nobody would listen to us. It took 10 years for the American people to even learn any of the facts at all. And so it shouldn't surprise us that people are ignorant about the government programs that abuse our rights, because those programs themselves usually hide behind a veil of secrecy. And I think that's a failure of the press as well as we the people in holding our government institutions accountable.
Do you believe that we will see a restoration of the rights and more informed public because of the revelations of Edward Snowden?
Absolutely. In fact, I think that process has already started itself. Certainly the public is more well informed. There's no question about that. In fact, as I understand it, Edward Snowden was the runner-up for Time's Person of the Year for precisely that reason. With respect to will our rights be recovered, I think that's very much an open question. We do know that several processes are underway. Within the executive branch, there's this review group that is reporting to the president. And again, I think its recommendations will be not nearly enough, but it at least reflects that even within the executive branch, there's a recognition that there's a problem. In Congress, there are no fewer than 24 bills pending that would restrain these abuses. The strongest among them, the Surveillance State Repeal Act, is not yet found a great deal of support, but would do much more than the next bill in line, the USA Freedom Act, which does have a legitimate shot at passage. And then there's the red herring FISA Improvements Act of 2013, proposed by Senator Feinstein from California, chair of the Intel Committee in the Senate. And that would basically legalize and entrench all of the NSA's abuses on the American people.
Why do you believe the USA Freedom Act has a better chance of passing among the others?
It has a better chance of passing than the others, A, because it just has more co-sponsors than anyone else, B, because it has very significant restrictions that it would place on NSA activity, particularly prohibiting bulk collection, while leaving in place substantially many of the authorities that the Patriot Act and the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act amendments of 2008 created. So you could think of it as sort of carving a middle road between allowing the intelligence agencies to continue operating while restraining their worst abuses.
But who's to say that they won't just continue to do it anyway?
Well, they very well might. And in fact, this is why citizen and congressional oversight are so very important. I mean, before, when you were asking me, how did we get here? And I mentioned executive abuses. It also has been the complicity of Congress, which has completely failed, utterly, abjectly, and for years at exercising its oversight responsibilities.
So even if the oversight is there and they cry national security, how do you get around that? If they cry national security, they put up a wall, you can't go in, you can't look, or if it's a black budget, you don't even know what's happening.
That's true for you and I as members of the public and of the press. But remember, the Senate and the House Intelligence Committees were created specifically so that Congress could still oversee secret programs. And those members are read into top secret and secret classified information. And yet still, in spite of their being read into those programs, they've done nothing to curtail them. In fact, Senator Ron Wyden, I think, is a great example of just the kind of person you'd want to see on one of these committees. He's on the Senate Intelligence Committee, and he has said for years that if he were able to divulge to the public what he has learned in his capacity as a member of the Oversight Committee, that there would be widespread outrage. And of course, Edward Snowden revealed some of that to the American public. And yes, there is widespread outrage. When you asked me before if there's anything worse, part of my hesitance in answering is I don't know what else is out there. I'm behind this secrecy in the same way that you guys are, right? So nobody really knows outside the executive branch just how bad the story is. And just to give a case in point, when you ask about congressional oversight, there's a report on torture compiled by the Senate Intelligence Committee. It is 6,000 pages long, and it particularly examines evidence of torture events dating from the Bush administration, well beyond those that we knew about before, well beyond the abuses at Abu Ghraib, well beyond Guantanamo Bay. These are thousands of photos and even videos depicting abuses as severe as outright rape that the Senate Intelligence Committee has explored, investigated, researched, and written up to the tune of 6,000 pages that no one has ever seen because it's all classified. You know, the president talks about having the most transparent administration ever. He talks a big game about particularly in his press conference announcing the review group that's looking into NSA abuses, the need to finally have a reasoned debate. I would love to have a reasoned debate, but that requires the facts to be known. And I think you're absolutely right that behind the wall of overclassification, the executive branch, whether under the Bush administration or the Obama administration or the Clinton and the first Bush administrations for that matter, and certainly the Reagan administration, have hidden embarrassing details behind the classification wall. And remember, that was set up to give our nation's sensitive intelligence operations the room to operate. Unfortunately, that secrecy has been pervasively abused, and both Congress and the courts have deferred to it.
All right, Shahid, what is your website? How can people track your progress of the Bill of Rights Defense Committee?
Please check us out online at www.bordc, that's Bill of Rights Defense Committee, bordc.org.
All right, that was Shahid Buttar right here on WHDT. He's from the Bill of Rights Defense Committee. He's the executive director. Stay tuned. We have the rest of today's headlines, all of the news from Hollywood, California, and a full report on the weather coming up on WHDT.